Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Real Talk. And this is actually kind of a special edition of our Real Talk About Marketing podcast in lieu of the recent announcement Google made that they are actually not deprecating cookies. Kyle and I felt like, it's such an important topic. It's something we've been talking about, Kyle, right, since 2020 when this was first announced. I think our podcast was actually birthed around that time.
Yeah, around 4 years.
So it's been a wild ride. It looks like we're getting some closure here, but we really wanted to kind of tie a bow as much as we could on this topic, what it means, kind of break down some of maybe the implications of, third-party cookies kind of hanging around for a while. So Kyle, what are your thoughts as we kind of get into this special edition of our podcast?
Yeah, well, obviously yesterday was an exciting day, and appreciate Google, flooding my inbox with emails, both from the industry and from internal, folks, just asking like, hey, what's going on? It's one of those things, right, where it was kind of in some ways anticipated because of all the challenges that were coming across, both from regulators as well as just from industry. IAB had a pretty significant report out on the, on the privacy sandbox and how it was very difficult to use, and the results weren't always, in favor of the marketer. So in some ways, not unexpected. Other ways, kind of gave you a sense of, okay, have I been punked for the last 4 years? Because it is a very significant change, and one that you don't see a lot in industry, kind of a 180 to happen quite that quickly. So interesting times.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, for our listeners to kind of summarize the announcement. So, Google announced, we kind of got the news off the drum, one of the major publications, and it got spread around, really quickly, I'm sure with all of you as well, but that it would not eliminate third-party cookies on Chrome. And instead, Google will introduce a one-time prompt for users to set browser preferences. So, Kyle, it looks like, the privacy sandbox, there were some issues. We kind of saw them pivot multiple times, with even the branding, going from Flock to, some of the kind of new terms around the APIs. But, they did kind of come back, and it looks like they're focusing a little bit on consent. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's the big question now, right? Is by placing kind of the onus back on the consumer to kind of make the decision, to deprecate third-party cookies on their own environment, their own browsers or not, is certainly a great choice from view of, a lot of privacy advocates and ones who, think consumers should be in control, which is a good stance. But, that could play out a lot of different ways, right? I was actually joking just yesterday. I mean, if they roll it out and it's like one really big green button and a small red button, it's easy to sway, right? Kind of how consumers' response. Is it kind of more of an opt-in model? Is it more of an opt-out model? Are you, going to be presented the choice to, either automatically opt out of all third-party cookies as the primary, or is it that you're having to, kind of make the choice to go that direction, and that's not the default, like you're overturning kind of the default as your choice. So how they roll this out will be very interesting, and I'm sure we'll get a ton of scrutiny also from the CMA and the ICO and a lot of regulators.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Kyle just referred to the CMA and ICO, and those are kind of regulators more kind of out of Europe, right?
Correct.
So this isn't just a U.S. issue. I mean, Chrome is on browsers all over the world. Europe has taken a really, a stricter perspective on consumer privacy, and they've been heavily involved in looking at what Google's doing, even from an antitrust perspective. So Apple with Safari, Firefox, Mozilla, those browsers, decided early on, back in 2018 or 2017 even, that, cookies weren't a good thing. But their business models weren't centered on ad revenue. So, looking at the decision, there's obviously a reason why Google's kind of kicked the can down the road and has done so multiple times. How do you feel like, this decision is going to impact the advertising ecosystem, today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts. One, the reality is for brands or publishers that haven't really made significant progress on like a cookieless strategy or kind of a next gen offering. It is a bit of a reprieve. So there's going to be kind of a sigh of relief in certain areas in the industry. But for a lot of the industry that's made great strides, and there's been a lot of innovation, a lot of partnership work, and a move towards more of a first party context. That it's going to be business as usual, right? I mean, it's going to be, hey,
Right.
keep moving forward, because there's a general sense that collectively as industry we've learned a lot in the last 4 years, and some of that was just a self awakening to the fact that, like, hey, third party cookies were not actually a great vehicle to use, especially since they've already been deprecated for a much longer time on Apple and Mozilla and others. So it just makes sense to continue to evolve and move away from the third party cookie.
Yeah, and one of those kind of players, like you said, that has really been innovating in this area of cookieless has been the Trade Desk. They led the charge with UID 2.0, and I think that was a direct response, probably out of some of these CCPA, GDPR, cookie deprecation. However, obviously Jeff Green, CEO of Trade Desk, is going to have something to say about this, because he's the one that kind of threw Trade Desk name in the hat to kind of take the lead there. So after this announcement, Jeff's quote is saying, "I've been saying for years now that the advertising industry, to Google, to even to Wall Street, that I think it's a strategic mistake for Google to get rid of third-party cookies." And then he goes on to saying, Google seems to finally acknowledge that the best option for them is to give consumers the choice. So, to your point, it's like the industry's kind of starting to move on. And we're coming up with more deterministic IDs, maybe in the form of proxy of a hashed email, right? But it comes with its own problems. What are your thoughts on Jeff's quote there, and kind of maybe position of somebody like a Trade Desk who's invested heavily into kind of cookieless technology?
Well, like I said, a lot of the industry has made huge strides, and certainly Trade Desk has been at the front of that, and they've established a justified position that has proven out over the last couple of years to be a good strategic move. And why abandon that on kind of the quote whims of another party, right? Google made their decision, and while it does have its ripple effect, and again it does provide a little bit of a respite in areas, a little bit less pressure on, hey, here's a specific deadline, but the tide has already turned, and the majority of the industry is already moving down other paths. And Jeff has a great point that, he saw this coming, but at the same time knew that there's a better direction to take. And Dustin, I mean, you've been kind of on the front lines with customers and prospects in the industry. A lot of the largest brands in America. What's your sentiment about this as you're talking to brands?
Great question. First off, as I mentioned, Safari and Firefox, basically 50% of the internet is already deprecated, and that's not going to change. So really, no matter what, brands still need technology to enable addressability and attribution. So, attribution, the ability to measure performance, is impacted by third-party cookies as well, across all those browsers. So not just Chrome, but, because advertisers aren't just talking to customers on Chrome, they're talking to them on every browser. So there's still, growing pressure, I think, from the states and the Fed that are continuing to challenge all the major platforms like Google. That's not going away. So, I think Google, and, it looks like they are really kind of starting to focus on consumer privacy, but, just saying cookies aren't being deprecated doesn't mean that there's not going to be pressure still as new states come on board and pass laws that kind of look more like GDPR. And then, third-party cookies, like you said, were never that great in the first place. If you could choose between like a highly deterministic and consented advertising ecosystem and this kind of non-transparent, highly probabilistic advertising ecosystem, which would you choose, right? I think everyone would say that, if I could give consumers, more control and consent, if that could be scaled, and they said that they want to know about these products and services, even across the publisher ecosystem, they would take, that choice instead. So I think it's overall kind of better for the consumer. And then, companies like Trade Desk and even us, Acxiom has really, tried to push things forward, even from a first party perspective, because we've seen this kind of more focus on collection of first party data, consent. So the use of things like first party tags, collecting more data and leveraging those in compliant but unique ways and innovative ways to engage with consumers. I think, those are just some things that, I would tell clients as they're thinking about this. This isn't a freak out moment. It's actually a good thing.
Absolutely.
Right. It allows us to kind of double down, honestly, on what we've already been doing, while at the same time, like you said, having some reprieve and knowing that we don't have to guess on what date cookies are 100% going away.
Right.
So that's a lot, but those are just some thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's great. And our longtime partner LiveRamp, in a blog post late yesterday, kind of reiterated the same. They essentially said, that omni-channel is better, that having a broader perspective, especially with CTV, which isn't dependent on cookies anyway, right? That with the rise of CTV and being able to go to mobile apps, which you also have a lot of options within the mobile space, that an omni-channel approach is better. And also it does kind of give you that opportunity to continue to focus on kind of the authenticated path, that first party direct knowledge of the consumer, while still, leveraging cookie to maybe round out some reach. And I think that's going to be an overall sentiment, which, honestly, we've been, talking about for quite some time, and certainly have been enabling for our customers here at Acxiom, is kind of that optionality. Like, don't look at this and certainly cookie deprecation as a whole for the past, 4 years, we've said, is not a binary decision. It's not black or white. It's in this period, it's always been about optionality. Use the best strategy for the right channel at the right time so that you can maximize the effectiveness of your campaigns, so that you can engage the consumer in the most effective way, while still respecting the consumer. And that's a big piece to it, right? This is really all stemming back to kind of privacy and consent and really engaging the consumer in a manner that they feel good about. And so, this is not a time to abandon those strategies.
Yeah.
Rather, it is a time to continue to lean in. Again, maybe a sense of urgency may change a little bit, in the sense that, like, like the test isn't tomorrow, so you have a little bit of time to continue to test out different strategies, study some more, put those out into the market.
Yeah.
But really take advantage of the fact that the industry has put a ton of effort and energy into bringing a better solution
Yep.
forward. So don't just fall back to old ways because they feel easier.
For sure.
Like, lean in.
Yeah. And, really, if you think about it, even Google has a boatload of first party data. If you think about, some of their platforms like YouTube, where they've collected, highly deterministic first party data, Facebook or Meta, everything's driven off an email. But then, when you get into the open internet and, more of the, paid impressions, DV360, some of those programmatic, where DSPs and SSPs are involved in the bid stream. That's really kind of the focus of this kind of conversation, right? That's where third party cookies really did have they were the wiring of that ecosystem. So, I think there's already been some testing, around, and the drum kind of talked about some of the things like Google started to deprecate, to kind of see what would happen. I think they deprecated 1% right at the end of last year, beginning of this year.
Yeah.
And I think they mentioned starting to see some results there. They just couldn't quite get to where they wanted to be in the time frame that they set up for themselves. And I think they got tired of honestly just kind of being those people that just kept saying, hey, it's going to be another year. It's going to be another year. Speaking of some of those, KPIs, in experiments run and that sandbox tools, they're saying that Google saw an 89% recovery of ad spend in Google display ads, 86% recovery in ad spend on DV360. But yet when they got into retargeting, this got really interesting. They said, remarketing, for instance, remarketing campaigns, meanwhile, showed a 55% ad spend recovery on Google Ads and 49% on DV360. So we've always talked about, from a use case perspective, remarketing is one of the primary use cases that were really heavily impacted. What are your thoughts on, that issue is not going away, right? Especially on Safari and Firefox. So how would you recommend, clients kind of look at that issue and resolve it potentially?
Yeah, I think, as we've been saying, and even evidence there through Google's own testing, right, that remarketing is a challenge, especially in a state where, as a whole, where the industry is losing a lot of those kind of tracking signals. In other words, ability to just kind of find a person on the open internet and be able to remarket to them, even in places where the consumer may not have been expecting to be remarketed. Right. But there is great work that's been done collectively across the industry of direct connections, a lot of retail media networks being able to take a first party sync with a brand and being able to identify that particular audience and then be able to target that audience, within like the retail media network or other places. So I think it's just leaning into those strategies. It is a more complicated solution set because you're dealing with multiple parties in a new way, but it's a powerful way. And it's really, kind of looking at the first party data advantage to say, like, your customers and your prospects. You can work still with parties, with some third party data to model take advantage of all the advancements we have in modeling capabilities and such to identify the right type of consumer, and then work directly with partners that you trust, that you understand their privacy stance, that you feel align with your strategies, and then you still can effectively have a good campaign strategy there for marketing to consumers off of your own media.
Yeah, no, that's such a good perspective, Kyle. And I think we saw Snowflake over the past 5 years. These data clouds, marketing clouds,
Absolutely.
kind of start to really have a much bigger impact on the advertising ecosystem in like data shares. So, like you said, while it is a more complex thing to share person-based data rather than these kind of cookies that have wired up the connections non-transparently, I think technology is starting to catch up, right? And we're kind of starting to see, even in real time, the use of maybe augmenting your first-party data with third-party data, but in the context of a kind of more of a clean room, right? Where you don't actually have to share PII. There is a person-based proxy that is kind of pseudonymized or anonymized in such a way that it can't be, disclosed or used across the open internet or hacked and things like that. So these new kind of identity capabilities, I think are going to, play a huge role going forward. And I think it is going to be better. I think moving from, the screen, the device, as the identifier to people, but in a much more, around consent, privacy in mind, I think is going to help everyone involved, not just the consumer, not just the advertiser, but the publishers, as they're, they have a skin in the game too. They're monetizing their content. They employ a ton of people. The economy's, kind of driven off of all of this. So I think, showing results based on real deterministic matches and ad impressions, things like that can only help, right? With media waste, some of the things that I think advertisers are really struggling with and have struggled with for the past 2 decades.
Yeah, I think you touched on a great point there around, waste, media waste, and honestly, fraud. I mean, we're still talking a lot about made for marketing or made for advertising sites and such.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was enabled because you had this lack of transparency. You had these, quote, third-party cookies that were out there, and you really couldn't tell who it belonged to, and you were taking some fairly obfuscated signals and just assuming, like, in a way, we just, relaxed at the time, back into the, 50% of my marketing is effective. I just don't know which 50%, because it was kind of like I didn't have a mechanism to really understand that.
Yeah.
Well, that's changed. The modern marketer now is in control. They have their first party data that they're collecting. They know those signals. They know, that they're consented, and then they can have those direct relationships and build out that trusted pathway to advertise with precision, at a person level, and know and get much, stronger signals back of like, yes, I'm actually reaching the people I was intending to reach, and in places where I was intending to reach them, because you're making more, direct buys or working directly with partners. So I think it's going to bring and continue to bring more efficiency.
Yeah.
The ad spend is going to be there now, as with any kind of market. CPMs are rising, in areas that have that precision and that transparency, but it's offset by the fact that you're not just spending a lot of ad money on media that you're not even sure is reaching a real person, right?
Yep.
And so it's going to continue to be balance for marketers, and something that marketers need to um, continue to investigate, test, partner, and really just continue to drive the whole ecosystem forward in a much better place.
Yeah. You and I have always talked about the value exchange, right? And I feel like this
Yep.
really puts way more emphasis on kind of those three primary entities in the value exchange. Like for a marketer who's representing a company who sells products and services, it puts more emphasis on are those products and services, uh, you know, competitively, do they have an advantage? How can I talk about those things? And it's kind of removing some of the almost like manipulative things that people can do with technology to try to gain an advantage beyond the intrinsic value of the product and services being offered, right? So like I think even on the publisher side, like you said, these sites that have been kind of fake sites that drive a ton of
Mhm.
traffic and fake advertising, all this waste, with deterministic IDs, like you said, it's like, then how good is your content if you're a publisher? Is the content I'm writing valuable to the consumer? So it starts to really emphasize that value across all three. And then ultimately it's in the control of the consumer then. Where do I want to buy products and services? Where do I want to read content? Um, and I think that's how it was meant to be all along. I think in a way, kind of some of these technologies have kind of mucked things up, right?
Yep. No, I totally agree, and I think we are still on the front end of a new era.
Yeah.
We're moving in that direction, um, and I think the key is that at a time like this, um, this isn't a reason to pivot. This isn't a reason to back away from where we've been heading. Rather, it's to continue to move that way, and this just creates some optionality, some ability to, if you're really concerned about reach, and you're going for more of a broad uh, exposure of a particular campaign, then you still have those options. But now you also have the ability to fine tune those campaigns and really target certain platforms or partners, and make those connections at a people based level where there's confidence in the precision of that. So it's, in a way, it's kind of best of both
Yeah.
worlds. Like we've put in a new ecosystem that's really effective, and now you still have kind of that fallback. If anything, I would just say, marketers should view this just kind of as a switching of what's prioritized, and like third party cookies should continue to move into a secondary or tertiary position within your strategy, and you're leveraging first party authenticated, certainly partner integrated, and then third party cookies, right? And kind of a more holistic strategy, but like, don't negate those first two and just fall back to, oh, I'm just going to use cookie based strategy,
Yeah.
because that is going to continue to deprecate. Like I said, ICO has already said, like, hey, it's great that they were looking to deprecate third party cookies. I mean, I was still, a lot of the regulators' intention was to move forward with that.
Yeah.
They just didn't like the alternative answer, which was the privacy sandbox. They had concerns around that because it put a lot of direct control and a lot of lack of transparency into the hands of the browser, provider. So it's not like everyone is like, oh, okay, yeah, great, they made the right decision. Now just forget about the last 4 years. I mean, it's like, no, there's still work needs to be done. It's still about privacy. It's still about the consumer. Yes, they're putting some things into the hand of the consumer. We'll see how that plays out. But in the meantime, we as an industry will continue to move forward, and we'll continue to innovate, and we'll continue to partner, and we'll continue to create an ecosystem that's based more on first party authenticated audiences and direct relationships that are um, at a much higher level of precision and transparency.
No, you're totally right. And, I don't think this, from Google's perspective, I don't think they're abandoning the APIs completely, right? It's like,
No, they're not. Yeah.
so there's still going to be things that, brands need to know. And, partners like Acxiom are going to have to understand, really understand how to leverage those and maximize your ability to reach people, right? Not devices, but people. And I think that's the point.
Yeah.
And, like you said, it's like there is this more, other things that they said is focused on privacy. They even talked about the incognito, mode of maybe obfuscating IP address. So there's things that, they're kind of following some of the things that Apple's done, on their side. So there's always going to be a need. We always said change is constant. Staying on your toes, making sure that you understand what's changing, or have partners in place that are keeping up with those changes, so that your technology is not becoming irrelevant. Your ability to reach customers isn't becoming irrelevant. So yeah, it's exciting times. And I think that the brands that are going to win are going to be ones that continue to just like maniacally focus on driving relevant customer experiences and understanding their customers. I think that's the key. It's like, if you're gonna have highly optimal acquisition campaigns, or media spin and things like that, who are the customers that are engaged with you already? How much do you know about them, even when they're changing, right? I think it's those things that really matter.
Absolutely. I think it's a great time in the industry. Again, lots of innovation going. Publishers are in a new position because they're able to, really understand their constituency and capture that first party data. And now they have a means to better monetize that rather than just passing that off to a third party. They're actually able to kind of do that themselves. And then certainly for brands, optionality is on the table, right? There's different strategies they can employ. They can look to tune those specifically to their needs, and that's a huge advantage. And then for consumers, I mean, it is bringing some additional choice, some more consumer, self-sovereignty of being able to make a decision. Do I want, cookies in place, or do I want a value exchange that's in a different format? And so in a way, I think there is a win-win-win out there. It's just going to take additional time and effort on everyone to continue to work together to get to that position. This announcement really doesn't change that. And so my advice to our listeners and our partners is, hey, let's just keep on moving forward.
Yeah.
Right. And not fade back on this. We're in a good spot. There's a lot of good things happening for the publishers, for the brands, for the consumers. And so let's just keep carrying that forward.
Absolutely. I think the future is bright. And, I think we've learned a lot over the past 4 years, despite, how the outcome's not maybe looking like we thought they would. But that's always going to be the case, right? You can't predict what's going to happen. So, taking what you have, understanding, the circumstances that, are current, and kind of seeing the trends, I think it's important. I think consumer privacy is going to continue to trend. That's not going away. I think there's always going to be more emphasis on, I think even more of a, potentially more self-sovereign control of the data, right? I mean, these are things that we have to keep an eye on and honor. Because I think eventually,
Absolutely.
A competitive differentiator is that respect, honoring consumers, in this entire process, no matter if you're a publisher or an advertiser. I think consumers are becoming more aware of, how their data is being used, how, they want to be treated digitally when they're not walking into a store, but, they're consuming content, across the internet. So But yeah, I think the future's bright, and we've come a long way, and we have a long ways to go. But we're up for the challenge, right?
Absolutely. Yep. That's great. Thanks, Dustin. A great conversation today. Look forward to just getting out there, seeing where all things lead, and helping our clients really maximize their engagement with consumers.